Good afternoon. Would members of the Planning and Housing Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum?
And we're back, and I think I would like. I have some questions. Do you have question? Do you have questions? I do. Okay. Do it first. Councillor Fletcher, your questions?
Thank you. I just want to ask about the average market rent, and the affordability factor is considered to be 100% of average market rent. Now, how concerning is it that our average market rent is skewed by the housing market in the City of Toronto? Is there any concern there, and is there any way to mitigate that in any way?
Through the chair, the city's official plan for affordable rental is based on 100% of average market rents. And this is based on a survey that CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing, completes every year looking at all 250,000 plus purpose-built rental units across the city. So it takes into consideration both units where someone has lived there for 20 plus years, as well as units that have recently turned over. Certainly, we know it's a tool that's responding to the rental market, and one of the benefits is it's updated every year compared to census data.
I think I'm speaking about the skewing of the rents. If we're looking at the rents in, let's say, Markham or other cities, is our average market rent much higher?
Through the chair, I can't speak to what other municipalities, what their average market rents are, but I can say that throughout the province, almost all other municipalities use average market rent for their affordable rent.
I'm not asking about if we use it. I'm asking about any concerns about the high average market rent and other these factors of mitigating by making it deeper, but it means we only get less housing. So to go deeper, we only get 10%, whereas at 100%, we get 20. That's how I'm reading this. But I'm looking at if there has been any concern by anybody, perhaps in the Affordable Housing Office, about the skewing of the average market rent because of the rental costs in the city of Toronto. So it's either yes or no. You've looked at it and you're concerned, or it's just business as usual. Or you haven't studied it. That's the other option.
I would think, we're hearing, certainly through the chair, councillors' concern about it, and it's something that we could investigate further. I think I understand. I'm trying to reflect on what is being identified as is the whole rental picture. We're starting behind the 8 ball, in other words, because our rents are automatically higher, and
Right.
it is what it is. That's one response, but I think you're trying to capture whether or not that should be a factor unto itself that we should more particularly examine. That's what I'm
I
hearing.
think that's right. And so it sounds like that hasn't been examined in a deeper way, just that issue. For all the planning studies that we do, and it's noted that mid-rise doesn't cough up a lot of affordable rental. How many planning studies, and does planning approach that by trying to have a benefit of some kind for affordable housing? Does that get baked into any planning studies that you've done so far?
I would say through the chair that if we've done a planning study or done a planning framework where, such as Midtown Focus, TO Core, we have looked at unit size, for example, unit size policies in those areas, but we've deferred to the citywide approach for securing affordable housing through both our existing large sites policy and through the emerging IZ approach that we're taking. So our general thrust has been to look to this program as a means to capture a wider range of affordable housing across the entire city where it works.
But where we're looking at, and we wish to include more, let's say we have studies that are mid-rise studies that have baked in a height limit through the OPA, is it of concern that it's hard to get any affordable units in those situations? And what do we need to do to achieve that?
I think in part that would be captured through the unit, through the size threshold that's being examined through the inclusionary zoning approach, where if you had a building that did have 100 units inside the core, for example, that was mid-rise, or 140 units outside of the core, that would be a way to capture affordable in mid-rise. But I'm sure for many, many mid-rise projects that are maybe in the 75-unit range, that's something that might be too much to handle on the economics of many of the mid-rise projects.
And lastly, the city owns a fair amount of land. This is kind of a non-inclusionary zoning. It's like our own inclusionary zoning for the city. So Toronto Parking Authority, and I always use this example, it's in Councillor Wong-Tam's ward, and the Parking Authority with a five-story garage apparently sold that land to a developer. There's going to be 100 stories there, and there's not any, it might not be your ward anymore, might have been moved to Councillor Layton's, but that there is not one affordable unit there. I find that very hard to believe, and I'm wondering, have there been strong enough changes in how we're approaching our own lands that that would never happen again?
So through the chair, council wears 2 hats. One hat is a regulatory planning hat, and it can impose on itself, as it would private market developers through its policy frameworks, affordable housing requirements. But council can also, as a landowner and its business hat, determine to write down the value of its land sales and utilize that land value toward the achievement of other goals, such as affordable housing. And that's exactly what's happening on the 11 sites, where council will deliberately probably withhold some revenue and exchange that for delivering on affordable housing. Decisions in the past, clearly the one that you identified in Yorkville is an example where council chose not to forego revenue and write down the value to translate that into affordable housing.
That's not one of the 11 sites, but anywhere where we own substantial real estate, one might expect, since we're asking private developers to add in through inclusionary zoning, we would be asking ourselves to lead by example.
Yes, through our agency Create TO, we can, as I said, council can take two approaches: a business hat through Create TO and include in the business terms of a lease or sale a requirement to achieve affordable housing. It can also do it through its own regulatory devices.
Thank you. I think I'm the only one left with some questions, and I'm going to apologize if I'm going to repeat some of the questions that my colleagues might have asked just before lunch. Can you explain a little bit, what's the assessment report?
So to the chair, the assessment report is required in the provincial regulation, and it requires two key pieces: a housing need and demand analysis and a financial impact analysis, looking at the financial viability of inclusionary zoning and its impact on the housing market.
The economic viability, okay. And when you looked at that, do you look for that breaking point of, you want to, that you can get affordable housing, but you can continue to have a healthy development industry, correct?
That's correct.
And you consider the breaking point like the highest amount of affordable housing that you're going to get? Is that what you're trying to, the lens that you're trying to put when you're looking at these performers?
So to the chair, we looked at a number of different market areas across the city, strong markets, moderate and emerging markets, and tried to assess what that, how much affordable housing could be created without negatively impacting market development.
Okay. And going back to the 100 units limit, is this, is the principles that the same for, I know that we don't charge section 37 on 10,000 square meters, which in a lot of times is around that, between 80 and 100 units is about 10,000 square meters. Is that the same reason? Is it's the economics of those kinds of buildings that are impeding in some of these?
To the chair, one of the principles that we looked at is wanting to continue to encourage the production of mid-rise development. We know mid-rise, generally speaking and typically, is at a disadvantage in terms of competing in terms of development viability with taller buildings. So we were trying to strike that balance in terms of what the majority of mid-rise projects that are of a smaller scale and how they wouldn't have an inclusionary zoning requirement.
So let's go to consultation. So we're going to go to consultation with the draft policy. A lot of deputants talked about the fact that they would like to see more in certain areas. So we're open to all that consultation and open to have those kinds of that we're not just consulting on the 20%. We're actually saying this is 20%. So we welcome these kinds of deputations and we're open to this kinds of input so that then we can do the analysis. Is that how the consultation is going to work? Or, we have a consultation and then somebody walks in and says, you should be looking at having it across the city, and you're like, we're not allowed to speak about that.
To the chair, absolutely. We want to have a wide and open dialogue as part of our consultation process, and part of that will be informing members of the public about different policy options and the strengths and weaknesses of different options so that they can make an informed, give us informed feedback.
So a lot of the things that you could consult on a lot of these things that we heard here today as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Bill 108. So this means that we would only be allowed to have it in the 165 areas of the transit master stations, correct? So that's 800 meters within those stations.
It's 500 to 800 meters, a range to be determined looking at each of the major transit station areas. So some of those characteristics may be smaller, some may be larger, that may be suitable to meet those minimum densities, but it is tied to having those implementation policies, including zoning, in place in those areas by July 2022. So we would have to develop a work program to proceed with that work.
So we have to have that work done by July 2022.
In its total, I imagine we'll develop a work program that will prioritize certain MTSAs.
So let me ask you something. So
Bring them
if
in
Bill
tranches.
108 gets approved in the form that it is today, we have to do all that work up front of this work that we're doing here today. So we could be delaying this quite a number of years. Is that correct?
Through the chair, to the chair. We have till 2022 to bring our plan into conformity with the growth plan. We can start the studies on a geographic basis and the linear basis beforehand. So I would see us starting a work program to bring some of the pressure areas where we want to put the zoning in an MTSA well in advance of the 2022, but 2022 is the deadline that the province considers to be the date for conformity exercise.
I would add that, you can almost think about running these things in parallel.
Okay.
Continue to develop the IZ approach, finish the consultation, kind of get it baked, and then at the same time, we're advancing a work program on MTSAs, so that when you bring, 10 or 20 MTSAs forward, you've got, your IZ ready to plug in. I would just leave you with the impression, though, that that's going to be a lot of work and will be less flexible than it would be if we could otherwise just advance the IZ policy on its own and not have that, that prerequisite to rely on.
And do we still need ministerial consent under Bill 108 on the IZ?
Yes, we do.
We do. Okay. Okay, those were my questions. Any other questions? Seeing none, speakers? Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy to see this report come forward. I think it's long overdue. And when we look back on the history of just how long city councillors, members of the community, housing advocates, city staff have been fighting to try to realize inclusionary zoning in the city's toolbox of affordable housing strategies. We have lost so much opportunity. I quoted the number at a press conference today, but the number is 12,000 units if we count between 2011 and 2016. We don't have an updated number, and I got to tell you, the approvals were still rolling on, and so I suspect that number is more like 16, 17, maybe 18,000 now of units that we could have real affordable units we could have had in operation today that we wouldn't have had before. Just think of that, what that would have done to the list of people waiting for affordable housing. Just think what it could have done to the market. And it's not the only tool that we need in the toolbox, but it's a tool. And it's a tool that serves middle income, young people. It's a tool that allows us to fill in an important gap in our housing portfolio. We're never going to get the level of deep affordability that everyone needs through a tool like inclusionary zoning, but it can be an enormously powerful starting point. And it also starts to bring to the table every developer, not just the one or two that we have maybe we've worked with along the way, or maybe Sean somehow convinced or enticed to put a little bit of affordable housing in their buildings, but everyone will start to bring that experience to the table. All of them can start to understand that it doesn't break the budget or ruin a project by including a little bit of affordability in your project. Other cities have been doing this. They've been doing it for decades in some cases, successfully. But the government of the day decided to drag their feet, and we lost a decade of ground. And now this government has put forward proposals that will delay the implementation and restrict the implementation of inclusionary zoning further. And that should be our number one concern. That should be our number one focus for the next couple of weeks until we are able to stop this legislation from going through. It should be to say, this will put our efforts to actually build affordable housing back by years. By years. And then we're going to have to continue on the dialogue about our own policy. And I spent a little time when I was putting forward motions a couple years ago, trying to get staff to start working on the policy. I put a little time into researching what other cities were doing. And at that point in time, some of those cities were going through reviews of their own. And every city has a bit of a different roadmap, bit of a different formula, a bit of a different recipe for how this works. And it was really interesting to look at theirs and how theirs had grown and improved, and then contrast to that to our starting point. At least the point that we're going to go out and consult with. So I'm hopeful that there'll be some amendments coming from this committee that look to staff to be a bit bolder in our approach. This isn't to say that I think they're far off the mark, but I think we need to be bolder in our approach given the severity of the housing crisis that we're currently in. Most of the other municipalities that were reviewed as part of this review and that we were able to find in my own review that we did internally in my office had policies that were either stronger, that they went deeper with affordability with longer term, more units set aside for a smaller number, for buildings that were smaller than what are being proposed as our starting point. And I think it's important that we actually start and go out and consult with a much stronger position. Because I'm hopeful that that will mean that we can actually get a stronger outcome and a stronger policy that will produce more affordable units. My worry is if we go in timid, we're either not going to get the most we could out of this tool in the affordability toolbox, but in fact we may see it go backwards even more, and that we may see a significant amount of pushback at the end of the consultation. So I would encourage the committee and the city staff, council to be very bold in the position they put forward, because we're going to have to live with this for some time. But first and foremost is defending the city against Bill 108.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to move the motion, and the clerks can put that on the screen. While they're doing that, I just want to explain that the motion is really to ask staff to expand the policy direction as they go out, and to put before the community and the city residents that we actually extend the affordability period on inclusionary zoned units from 25 years to longer periods of affordability, including in perpetuity, and then to report back. And at the same time, asking staff to go out to the community to look at administering an income-based alternative to the average market rent. And that income-based approach should take a look at 30% gross income on housing costs. And that's where I'd like us to go. And I recognize that in staff's comments, and thank you to the staff for the report, but I recognize that in staff's response is that they said they are open to hearing all these suggestions. What I was perplexed by is why not go out with some bigger objectives, and that's what I'm hoping that can take place when this motion, hopefully with the support of the committee, is adopted. The word boat has come up several times today. I think Councillor Layton has just used it, and I believe Emily used it. I think Joy also used it. What people are telling us is to not negotiate from a position of weakness. Go out stronger, go out more visionary, recognizing that we don't have all the tools before us to actually build the widest range and options of housing. And this is one of the most sought after tools, and it's been introduced in Queen's Park at least 14 different times, 13 or 14 different times over the decades, and we've never gone this far. Then why would we take small, timid steps out of City Hall when we finally are out there talking about inclusionary zoning and we set ourselves back? Especially since we've already learned from other jurisdictions that they have developed other protocols in their cities at this same level of starting place, and they realized it didn't quite work. So they had to readjust. They had to go back out and negotiate through a lens of panic and to greater financial hardship to their taxpayers by then having to buy units after the affordability period ran out. And if we do see the housing crisis trying to get over that crescent, then we're going to have to be bigger and stronger in our position of consultation. And it's not lost on me that I recognize that there is going to be significant development sector pushback, because every single day, almost with few exceptions in Ward 13, I'm faced with the dilemma across the negotiating table where I ask very politely, I'd like you to introduce some level of affordable housing, and then we tippy-toe around this dance of what can and cannot be done, and they may lean towards, maybe, that we'll consider some affordable home ownership. And then it goes into this dark hole that I never quite understand how they arrive at those numbers or figure, and then there's never really a clear formula on how to purchase at what we think is a fixed price to actually get that outcome. So the benefits are all over the place, and of course, only a few families will ultimately benefit, and it's a phenomenal amount of work to just secure 5, 10, 14 units of affordable home ownership, let alone the fact that it is almost nearly impossible, to the tune of 2% out of the map that Deanna showed us, that only 2% of all new housing in the city is affordable by the definition of the city used through the official plan, 80% of AMR. So we're kind of stuck unless we make some big shifts. And part of that big shift is what happened at City Council at the last meeting. We said that we were going to move forward and start looking at housing through a rights-based approach. And that means that we're going to have to rethink everything we do, including going out to consultation, by asking who's not included when we talk about the policies as we develop the programs that will then turn into services that people can use. And right now, as it stands, the consultation has to be bigger, because you can't lead from behind, you can only go lead from the front. And we have to be able to, I would say, put out the widest range of options, don't hold anything back, knowing that the development sector is going to push back significantly. So whatever we are starting off with, we're going to be punched and punched and punched and punched until it comes back all weakened and pulsed up anyways. So this is, to me, the right approach, and it also should, if done properly, I think, and if we're able to withstand the development pressures here and the development lobbyists, is that it should give us the greatest number of affordable units. It should give us the greatest quantum of time, which is around the affordable period, which is in perpetuity, and it should also give us the greatest reach of around affordability, including those who are really low income, those who are living on ODSP, and I know that there will be those who say, this isn't quite the tool for them, but you're going to have to prove to me otherwise, and we should try it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Perks?
Oh, I have a
sorry.
question for the mover. I have no idea what impacts this has on my personal ward. I didn't see these motions in advance of them being on the screen. And is this straying from what staff were recommending, which I understand was evidence-based? You're actually directing versus asking, requesting. So if you could just clarify. Pardon, Councillor Perks?
I'm happy to. So the staff are going to be
Well, that's what I'm asking, Councillor Perks. That's my right. So thank you.
And thank you very much for the question. I'm asking staff to expand their policy direction as it stands right now. We're not making any final decisions today, so it's not like we have a baked-in solution that's being proposed to us by staff. Staff have decided to put some parameters on for things such as 100 units downtown, 140 units outside of downtown. I'm not touching that. Staff said that's what they want, where they want to go. They did say that they're recommending that we go out to talk to the community and suggest, how do you feel about a 25-year affordability period if we're to secure affordable rental? And I'm suggesting here, why not longer? It could be 40, it could be 50, it could be 60, it could be 70, it could be 99 years and in perpetuity, which is what is shown to us in the jurisdictional scan of best practices. And the same thing would go with respect to the definition of affordable housing, is that instead of defining it by average market rent at 80%, some jurisdictions say 60%, some jurisdictions say 40%, and then there are others who use the definition of 30% attached to their gross income. So I'm just giving you a lower range for the staff to go to.
So in your second motion, you're saying direct them to develop and include. So there's no options. You're directing them to do that. Is that correct? On the income-based alternatives?
That is correct, Councillor. And this committee has the ability to direct staff to do that. And of course, I've actually shown my motion to staff. My staff have actually helped me word it so it actually is technically correct. And so they've seen it. They've actually provided some input. I've amended it based on what they've said.
So why didn't they write this in the report?
Well, because I mean, their report came up with their set of recommendations. By way of us sitting on this committee, we review the staff's recommendation, we ask questions, and we move motions that can change the recommendation. So if you choose to adopt this, this will be the committee recommendations going to council.
And if I can be helpful as well, these discussions are also happening as the housing plan is actually being put together, the discussions about moving into an income. So this is actually very much into the level of discussion that staff is having. So staff is, I think, okay with it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Perks.
Thank you. A question of Councillor Wong-Tam. So Councillor Wong-Tam, reading your motion, you're directing staff, that's true, but you're directing them to provide us with options, not directing them what the final conclusion would be.
That is the way it is written. And that's staff's specific recommendations when I gave them my first draft.
Right. So by asking them to provide options instead of what the final conclusion would be, you're not prejudging what the results of the consultation will be. You're not prejudging what committee will do when the report comes back. You're not prejudging what council will do, and you're not prejudging what will happen in Ward 15.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perks to speak.
Thanks. Inclusionary zoning is complex because you're dealing with multiple variables. You're dealing with the period, you're dealing with the affordability level, you're dealing with the percentage of units. And if you move one variable, you have an impact on the other. And I just want to make it clear that, you know, from my point of view, the most important of those variables is the period of affordability. If we achieve great things with making a large percentage of units deeply affordable, but if it's for a 20-year period, all we've done is kick the can down the road. So I will be keeping my eye on the report back, having some emphasis or some options available for us to consider for permanent affordability. I don't want to get on a merry-go-round where we have to make new public investments every 20 or 40 years in order to rescue people who are currently in affordable housing but are about to lose it because the term runs out. If there's anything we've learned in the current crisis, job one is to protect the affordable units that you have. We're currently losing affordable units faster than we build them. So I don't want to recreate that circumstance by having a short period of affordability. I want to see options with permanent affordability. And on that point, I don't want to achieve the permanent affordability by having some kind of a subsidy from public money or through waiving or deferring charges. If we have public money available to invest in affordable housing, we can do it much more effectively by directly investing in social housing on publicly owned sites. That yields a higher and better, higher number of and better affordable units than by using this tool. So I don't want to achieve the permanence through additional public dollar subsidies, either by waiving charges or direct investment. That's very important to me. The third thing that I wanted to say is I was quite shocked to see the effect that Bill 108 has on the inclusionary zoning process. The province has presented their legislation as somehow an effort to improve affordable housing in Toronto and Ontario. They call it more choice, more housing, or whatever it is. I actually think it's less housing, less choice is the effect, as we've seen here, by slowing down and limiting the number of places where inclusionary zoning can actually happen. And I'm just here going to redouble my commitment, doing everything I can to getting that terrible piece of planning legislation stopped or overturned.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bradford? Yes. Councillor Fletcher?
I have a couple of motions here, and based on some of the deputations today, the first one is the Planning and Housing Committee direct the public consultation on proposed official plan inclusionary zoning policy directions and affordable ownership housing definition also include the following. So basically sending these to the consultation, apply IZ to as of right and rezone development, apply IZ as broadly as possible geographically, applying IZ at set rates that provide the greatest amount of affordable housing, keeping the housing affordable for the greatest duration, and ensuring inclusionary zoning units reach deeper levels of rental housing affordability wherever possible to reflect the need for deeply affordable rental housing, which is what we've heard here this morning at the committee. And it would be important that these are also officially part of that conversation when we're doing the consultation. And also to look at, ask the chief planner and executive director of city planning to be directed to include in the consultation process the elements currently used in the city's housing plan consultations to facilitate independent community groups hosting consultation events, so that our great, fantastic affordable housing community can do some of this and give us feedback, not simply in our venues. And I have one more associated with this, and that's the Planning and Housing Committee requests the Chief Planner and Executive Director of City Planning to report back on achieving at least 20% affordable housing on lands being surplused by city agencies and boards where the City of Toronto is the sole shareholder. And why I'm tying that there is because we're talking about private development, and we actually need to bring everything under one roof and have our own, I'll just call it our own internal inclusionary zoning policy. We have that, as was pointed out in my questions, for the 11 sites, but we have a lot more sites that there's land transactions taking place where we're not actually achieving that. And I'm just going to go back to that 5-story parking garage, which may have brought in some revenue, but when you're building housing already, I think we understand it just makes so much sense to bake in affordable units. And there are ways to do that that make it painless once we get them built. The city could own that floor, a nonprofit could own that floor. It can be operated by a nonprofit, but the city owns that, as we're doing at the Red Door. We're going to own that shelter. It's within a condo. We have to be creative. We have to break the mold. And I'm going to say that it should cover more buildings, because the scope where it is, it's only in tall buildings. I'm concerned with our mid-rise, we'll never get anything affordable. And the mid-rise development is great, our policy was great, but what's happening is it's now driving out stable rental units as they're being flipped, and people are moving in now that they're flipping for higher rent. They're rent-evicting a lot of people in areas where we've created a different policy. So that's an unintended consequence, and what I just say, a missed opportunity. I don't think we engage the public enough. We have great people that came here this morning. I don't think that we engage the public enough and give them what I'll call decision points. Are they concerned about affordable housing? We know that they are. We had an election less than a year ago. They are concerned about affordable housing. And we need to have that conversation. Does that mean that there's an extra floor? Does that mean there's extra units that you want in order to deal with existing planning studies that we've put in place that have very hard caps? We will never have an affordable unit on a number of streets in the city because we have hard caps. And I want to actually look at that as well. I didn't put that in here, but that is something we need to have that conversation. And I'd like to add affordable housing into all planning studies going forward, but I'm not doing that in my motions. Thank you.
So, Councillor, just to warn you that this report might have to be sent to executive, because a report like this cannot be done just by the chief planner. This has financial implications and real estate strategy
No,
implications.
that's fine. I
So
think
he
that
would
we should
probably-
at least have that go there. We'll forward that. I don't have a problem with that at all.
You have questions?
Question of the mover. And it was about that, if this is something that real estate would be involved in. And then the follow-up would be, we have the new stage gating process for affordable housing that was at this committee last meeting. Is this something that would tie in? I'm talking about the second motion. Is that something that we would tie in with that?
I think this is more, sorry. I think this is more in thinking ahead. The stage gating is once it's been established. It could be, but this is capturing the opportunity long before we get to an actual planning application that would be stage gated, my opinion. But you may have a different one.
Okay.
Mover, I just don't understand the financial impacts of this motion, and if you had any light to shed on that, that would be helpful.
Well, this is a report, so I guess that might be in there, Councillor. But there are requirements for affordable housing in many different places.
What might be in there? In the
Pardon me?
report?
In the report, yes. Is that hard to
But you're
do?
moving the motion. Does this, what type of impacts does this have?
Well, you know what, I would just say, let me go back to the example that you may have heard already about the parking authority garages. 5 stories above ground, that development could not take place without that parking authority garage. That's the same footprint. What did we get for that? Did we just get money? Was there more parking? Where was the decision point that we would have 100 stories of unaffordable condos with no affordable housing and extra parking or extra money to the city? So that's really the discussion that we're having, Councillor. And right now, it's all being made without this lens. And I think it's time to put this lens on it.
Can I request something, Councillor? Can we request the appropriate staff? I think there
Sure.
needs to be
No,
a
no,
group
that's
of
fine.
staff to
Yes,
have
I agree.
this.
Yep.
I mean, this is not a report that the chief planner can prepare. To be actually what you were looking for,
Councillor,
the
no
more I
problem.
hear you.
Well, I'll just ask for that.
And then I think
Happy to
staff can
change
get
that.
together and
Yep.
prepare a report like that.
Happy to do that.
Councillor, would you, I think that would
Yeah, I'm just
probably
not gonna
address, because
support- Yeah, I'm not going to support this motion just because I don't understand the impacts and the.
Yeah.
it's
And
out
that's
of
why I
blue,
put the
so-
chief, the appropriate staff, because I do believe that our
Yeah.
CFO needs to be involved in this. Like, you do need different lenses looking at this. This is not a planning zoning policy. This is a city policy,
Yeah.
real estate and
improvement.
financial and
Yeah.
so on. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much. I'd like to thank staff for all of their hard work on this. As we've heard this morning, both from the consultant and staff and deputants, this is an incredibly complex file. As Councillor Perks was just saying, many different moving parts to that. Even the 10-year nature of how we're talking about housing in the city has huge impacts on how this rolls out. Finally getting towards inclusionary zoning, sort of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel there, is a critical piece for addressing housing affordability in this city, not just today, but going forward, decades ahead, in the future of Toronto. And that's why that conversation about how long we can secure affordability is so critical. As with many of the reports that come to planning and housing, there is urgency on this file. Never has that been more important than with the recent introduction of Bill 108, of course, and the changes in the implications for inclusionary zoning that are frankly quite concerning. But we heard today in the presentation, a quarter of renter households are spending more than half their income on housing. That's not sustainable. Asking rents for units are 40% above CMHC average. Is that the best metric to look at? A fifth of renter households are living in unsuitable housing, and we have vacancy rates at 1.1% across the market, but even lower for deeper, more affordable units. So with those kind of conditions, it really is the most important thing, that I'm considering when reviewing this report is that we need to do as much as we can with this tool. And I do appreciate Councillor Fletcher's motion there to expand the scope of some of the things we're going to look at in the consultation. We can't miss this as an opportunity. And we've heard about our colleague Councillor Layton when he was here, the thousands of units that could have been produced had we secured inclusionary zoning at an earlier date. And that comes up over and over again. And I think it hurts all of us when we hear about those numbers and the missed opportunities that we've had as Toronto's continued to grow over the past decades. So we're going to take that crucial step of going forward with public consultation on these policies and to the Deputy's point earlier, making sure that we're ambitious with what we want to hear back on. That's really important. Let's hear back on more options. Let's understand the financial impacts on that. Let's understand the impacts of our ability to actually achieve and deliver affordable housing and inclusionary zoning. And then we can come forward with the recommendations that really reflect the priorities of our communities and the City of Toronto going forward. I want to see that we've pushed those requirements as far as we can go while still making sure that we can actually deliver some housing when we come forward with the policy. So I do think we should be looking to extend the affordability period so that we're not just simply moving the affordability problem down the road, decades down the road, which is the risk. And I want to see what we can do to have an inclusionary principle really embedded in our planning system, and that we have some component of affordability in major developments across Toronto, not just in the strong market areas, but also that transitionary piece, recognizing that what's a strong market today and what's a strong market tomorrow may not be the exact same thing. We need to make sure we can account for that. And if we are going back to the old OMB world, where we have to debate what makes good planning and the merits of good planning, then for me, there's no question that affordability, inclusive development is good planning, and that's how we should be defining it. So it's good that we're going to have a strong public process to form the basis of our policies. We always come up with the best policies when that is the foundation of what we're looking at. And I'm hoping we can achieve that by expanding the scope of our consultation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. Councillor Robinson, do you need to speak? No, you're good? Okay, thank you. I would like to speak. I do have a couple of motions. And the first motion is, everybody talked here about this assessment report and how it's going to be evolving, and we're going to be looking at the numbers. And I think it is important to work with our stakeholders that are well informed and continue that work with them, and to listen to the kinds of interpretations that they did of the data, and to see how we can get the most amount of affordable housing for the longest period of time. I think that's how you need to look at the policy, and how do you analyze this data and work at the data. I think that everybody wants to get to that place. So using the expertise that we have in the city, people in the sector that can work with us and looking at this data. I remember a few years ago, I met the deputy city mayor for New York, and they had revamped their inclusionary zoning. And I said, so what's your advice? Because we're starting to look at this in Toronto. And she said, look at the economics of this issue. This is more of an economic issue than a planning and zoning issue. If you don't make it work economically, you get nothing out of this. It has to work economically. You have to find that soft spot where they can handle, development can continue, but you have the highest amount of affordable housing that you can get out of that development. That's the soft spot that you're looking for, and I think that's what we need to get our minds around here and look for that soft spot together so that we can get as much as we can. My second motion is actually, because I'm an optimistic, so I think we're going to have inclusionary zoning done, and we're going to have units eventually in the City of Toronto, and we're going to have to think out how to administer those units. And I think we need to start working with the nonprofit sector to start working on the process, and to have them start to create a way for them to administer these units, because I think we can leverage this with the sector and actually get some wins out of this. So I would like to get your support for that. I would like to thank staff staff, because I know that it's been good work that they've been putting into this, with always this thing hanging around their heads about, Bill 108 and what it will mean, and, should we advance with this or not. But I think it is clear that there's a lot of good work, and I think that looking at the possibility of how this can happen and knowing that this will have a great impact, this is one of the biggest tools that we have available in our city to translate into some affordable housing units. We're very lucky to have a very robust and healthy development industry. Everybody should be benefiting out of that industry, including our city. And so what we're trying to do to create in here is a zoning system that is going to translate into some of those units, so that we build healthy communities. I tell everybody the same way that we need them to have healthy development industry to the developers, I tell them as well, you need a healthy city. And the only way you have a healthy city is that people can continue to live in here and have adequate and safe housing. You need that in a city to continue this trend that you have in the industry as well. So we need to come together as a city to create a policy that is going to translate into real affordability, real units. I think that we can do it. This is just the first step. But I think that the most important thing that we have to talk about also right now is that we are here. We're ready. We're ready to have this conversation with Torontonians. We might have a draft policy that needs some discussion, that needs some further looking into some of these points, but we've made it this far, so there's no reason for us to yet again have to do more transportation studies and other studies. We're ready to go. We could have this implemented in a few months, so we need to make sure that Bill 108 is not going to delay this process. We need every single unit as fast as possible, and to start the clock ticking, to make sure that as the developments are coming to the City of Toronto, as applications are coming in, that we can start applying that inclusionary zoning. 1 day of delay is too much, so we need to make sure that that message is carried on, because I think that we have the capabilities with everybody to come together and create a policy that could actually translate into real results in the city. So with that said, I hope I can get, go ahead.
On your motion A, if I could have that up?
Yep.
So when you say share the assessment report, I just want to make sure that I know that we've had some conversation here today about what the model does and all of that. So that would make the data available to the community?
And conversations. Like, I want to be able to have Steve Pomeroy and Sean Mahar and the build as well. I want everybody to be able to see, okay, this is how we analyze it, this is how we're doing, and to be able to talk to each other so we can have conversations about the data. I think everybody agrees that we need evidence-based decision on this. We want to get to the same place, so why not get our skills together and share? There's nothing, I don't think there's anything that we should be hiding in here. These are numbers, it's data. Let's work together to achieve the same goal.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so let's start with the vote. Each motion, okay. So, motion from Councillor Christian Wong-Tam. All those in favor? And that carries. Next motion, Councillor Fletcher. All those in favor? That carries. And next motion, Councillor Fletcher. All those in favor? Did you change that? Yeah, okay. Any opposed? Okay, that carries. No, sorry. My motion, all those in favor, that carries. And last in motion, all those in favor, that carries. And item as amended. Can we have a recorded vote?
Recorded vote on the item as amended. Councillor Bradford, Councillor Perks, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bailão, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Wong-Tam. That motion carries unanimously.
Great. So we are now going to item 6, strategy for minimizing the negative impacts of residential infill construction update. And I have a small motion that I would like to put at the table. I wish I had had more time to shop it around. Let me explain a little bit of the motion, what it is. So as most of you know, sometimes when... No, sorry, he withdrew. Sorry. Questions of staff on the, sorry, I didn't ask. Are there questions of staff on this item? Seeing none. Speakers? Questions of staff on the strategy to minimize the negative impacts of residential infill? So this is to ask staff to work with transportation and report back on the possibility of creating, in the areas where there's space allowed, permits for the trades. Because as you know, when you have construction in a residential area, if you can't just, if you have construction going on for 3 months or 4 months, you can't take visitor permits every day. So
It's just a report.
this is just a report asking if it would be, could something like this work?
Oh, no. You've moved right.
No, I asked if there was questions of staff.
Oh, okay. I did not hear that. I heard that there was a speaker and there weren't speaking.
No, just on this, I think this is great. I'll remind everybody that City Council did pass a motion that would allow in permit parking areas when it's not unsafe to be able to park a vehicle on the other side of the street temporarily, and the police have refused to acknowledge that. So I'd like to bake that into that because the mayor is on, it was a Police Services Board decision not to support it.
Okay, so if I could have a vote on this item? Sure, go ahead. You can ask of me. Oh.
It's related to the report.
But there's no, oh, the report, sorry.
The infill report. Yes. Oh, yeah. So just to staff, as you know, something I've been passionate about is the dust suppression piece. So what now changes on that piece to help the neighbors and people affected by this type of ongoing activity for sometimes months on end?
So you'll recall in May of 2018, Council adopted a new
Yes.
bylaw called DUST. It came into force in effect in September, so it's been in force in effect a little over 8 months. What it does is it provides the industry with options to use certain tools and materials to mitigate that dust. It also advises them to tarp and do other mitigating strategies to keep that dust on their property and reduce the nuisance to the neighbors.
Great, that's fantastic news. Thank you for your work on that and your team. What about information and notification? What's improved on that front?
So we did extensive communication with the industry in the fall to a number of trades that are listed on page 11 at the bottom of the report. So a number of the associations that are involved with the construction industry. Through the complaints that have come in the short time that the bylaw has been in place, we have been working with residents and the industry on a compliance-based, really on an education piece. This is a new piece of legislation. It's really important to outline the rules, their new rules, and so that everyone's aware of what they are, and we've had a fairly good success rate.
And what about the notification boards? Do they now include information about dust? Like, what are some of the successes on, also enforcing it as well? Have you had any successes since the start?
It's primarily been on education, letting people know that you cannot do this, and then working with them to find out ways to reduce it. So contractors want to get along. They get their business from referrals, and it's important for them to be good neighbors.
No, but I mean, you continue, I haven't seen it recently, but we'll see it this spring, clouds of dust coming from sites, like literally just almost graying the whole community. Do you feel like you're going to make progress on those fronts?
I hope so. We will put efforts towards it when we get requests from the public.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Speakers?
No, I don't need to speak. I just wanted those questions.
Okay, so I've spoken, placed my motion, so votes on the motion. All those in favor? Item as amended? That carries. Okay, item 6.7, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 923 Oxford Street. Nicholas Campney. Hello. You have 5 minutes. I think you've done this a few times. Oh, you want to connect to your computer? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, committee. My name is Nicholas Campney. I am the applicant of the sign bylaw amendment application before you, 923 Oxford Street in Etobicoke. I'm joined by my colleague here on the right, who is former Director of Legislation for Pattison Outdoor, Sid Catalano, and we're here in support of the application. We are seeking approval to permit a single-sided electronic advertising sign on the property, which is intended to advertise to traffic traveling along the Gardiner Expressway. In accordance with this proposal, we are seeking approval to print a sign that would contain electronic static copy only. There would be no motion, no flashing or animation. It would maintain the minimum required transition time between advertisements and instantaneously transition ad copy between slides. The amendments being requested are with respect to the size and height, separation distances, hours of illumination, and permit duration. This image here shows a aerial photo of the property where it's located in Etobicoke, being on the south side of the Gardiner Expressway and on the north side of Evans Avenue. This photo outlines the property in red, where the proposed sign location is shown here as outlined in yellow. Now, this sign is intended for traffic traveling eastbound and into the city, and only is one sign face, as I've said. So this is the proposed sign looking in the easterly direction, and is shown against a plain white background here. This is the reverse of the sign, which will not contain any advertising copy, and will be supplied by Bullfrog Power. We've also spoken with them regarding solar panel energy to supply the sign, and we believe there's a way to do that here. So we'd like to propose that this sign have the solar panel backing where there is no advertising copy displayed on the sign. So this is what motorists would see traveling eastbound along the Gardiner Expressway into the city, where the proposed sign is shown there on the right portion of the screen. For those of you who may be familiar, this is where the Purple Gorilla on the Party Store used to be located, but they have since vacated the property and been replaced by a new tenant and property owner. So in getting to sort of like the meat and potatoes of this application, the subject property is shown here as outlined in red. And this image is a snippet of the sign view mapping tool. And this shows all the designations of the properties as it relates to the official plan and the sign bylaw designations. So as you look at the legend in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that the employment sign districts are outlined with purple shaded areas, while the commercial residential are outlined in orange and the open space in green. So as you know here, the subject property and all the surrounding areas to the north, east, south, and west are all employment sign district areas. And under the sign bylaw, these areas are permitted as of right to contain electronic third-party advertising. Where we do fall short in this regard, though, is the separation distance to some potential sensitive land uses, we'll call it. There is the open space sign district located to the southwest, approximately 120 meters, and the open space, the commercial residential sign district located to the northwest. And although the staff report acknowledges that and I quote, the impact of the proposed sign on these sensitive land uses is likely to be limited, the CR sign district does not contain any residential uses, and the open sign district is not generally accessible to the public. But based on this, we've also had conversations with the Office of the Local Ward Councillor, Councillor Mark Grimes. And during our conversations with him, we have adjusted a proposal so that during the period between sunset and sunrise, we would like to dim the brightness of the sign by 50%. And effectively what this is doing is further separating that sign from any sensitive land uses. And we had an expert, he was here, who has since had to step out briefly, but he would be more adept at acting or answering any questions you guys might have with that. So we have a draft bylaw, which would replace the one that is currently proposed as part of the staff report, that we would ask that you guys replace and then vote to approve. And additionally, we have also proposed that the sign come equipped with an ambient light sensor. And this sensor would automatically adjust the brightness of the sign during all periods of the day, meaning that during the day, when the sign is brightest, the sign would be brightest, and that during the nighttime, the sign would automatically dim. Now, it's also important to look at where the context of the sign is located. In the area, there is an existing inventory of electronic signs that have been permitted since 2009. And this image here shows 5 of the existing signs. There's also an additional sign, which is taller than these sign structures, which has yet to be built by the applicant who originally submitted. But when we look at these existing signs in comparison to what we're applying for, you'll note that they are identical in nature. The orientation of the signs, the type of display, hours of illumination, so on and so forth, they are all identical. So when we compare this information here on a map, it's important to look at what this distribution is. Where the sign bylaw permits currently special regulations for electronic signs is within the Liberty Village area. And that's a special sign district which permits, as of right, signs to be located within the Gardner Expressway. However, when you travel west outside this district, those same provisions don't apply. But what we're saying is that based on the City Council approvals that have granted each and every one of these signs, we are of the opinion that an informal sign district has been established, whereas in the special sign district, it's really a mismatch of types of signs, sizes, heights, so on and so forth. But when you compare the image that I just showed, there is a set of consistency, and we are therefore requesting that committee vote to approve the draft bylaw we have revised. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Perks has some questions.
Yes, so this is not going to the sign variance committee. Why is that?
We have recently appeared at the sign variance committee, and they've made it mention to us that they are there in place to look at minor sign variances, where if, let's say, the required setback is 7.5 meters, you might come in with 3. When it comes to applications of this size, type of scale, and magnitude, they've made it very clear to us through the public record that they'd like to see these come to City Council for fear that if they were to approve it, you guys would have some backlash, because they are city-appointed by City Council.
So to be clear, they did not grant you this sign?
We never applied for it through sign
Pardon me?
variance. We never applied for it through
Oh, I
sign
see.
variance.
You said that you'd been there on this.
We have. We have had discussions with them regarding similar matters, not for this property or the one after.
So your experience is that if you had brought this to sign variance, you would have been turned down?
That's not to say we would turn down. They've requested to all applicants that these matters go to City Council for consideration.
I don't think the sign variance committee has ever given a direction to an applicant that they send it to City Council, so I'm not following you. You chose to come here because, as you said, you've had similar ones turned down at sign variance. Is that correct?
That is not correct. We have not applied for a similar sign as Patterson Outdoor Advertising. The sign variance committee has looked at these types of applications in the past.
Oh, not
Since
you.
they've been
I'm sorry.
established.
I'm sorry, I
And
misstated.
they've made it part of the public record during their deputations that they are not in place to consider these large type of applications. They are there for minor variances which fall short just barely of what the bylaw requires.
Okay, so you're here because the process we set up allows for a review of minor variances based on local site conditions, and your assessment is your sign would fail that test. So you're coming here to ask us to change the whole bylaw just for your site. That's why you're here, correct?
In a roundabout way, yes.
Okay, good. I understand that. So I heard you say that you've met with the local councillor. If before council I go and check the lobbyist registrar, will I find that you've met with other councillors on this sign?
I personally haven't, but I am registered with Councillor Grimes for this matter.
Okay. Can you show me or provide to me the rate card for the current sign and the rate card you propose to have if you get this variance?
Rate cards are only established after the signs are approved. And quite honest, this is a planning matter as far as my opinion. And
Well, I want to understand what the public and private interests that I'm trading off are here. Surely, if you're making an investment in a, or you're considering making an investment because this will cost you some money, you've done a business case, so you must have some sense of what your rate card would be. Can you show me the rate card for your current, what you currently get on that location and what you plan to get on that location?
there is no sign existing at this location.
So your rate card's currently 0. What would you be getting? What is your, like, you've done a business case. No, I mean, I know Pattison, I know you're not stupid guys. You must have, if you're considering making an investment of this size, some business case you did. Can I see the proposed rate card for what you will achieve on this side?
Again, the rate card is it's what we make up. There is no official rate card throughout the industry.
Okay.
What I can say, Councillor, is these signs on the Gardner of this size go for about $10,000 as the rate card. Again, that's subject to
$1,000 per what
the
period?
kind of buy you want. If you're going to buy just locally on that one sign, you're going to buy throughout the GTA, so on and so forth. So again, that's just a fictitious number, and it should have no bearing on.
Thank you. I understand now.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Fletcher?
At times, there's been, when sign companies have come forward to get approvals, they have made donations or proposed donations to various community groups. Have you done any of that or made those entrees to any community groups for donations?
Through the chair, no. We've been instructed that these applications are planning matters and are to be considered solely as such.
And you've been instructed they're planning matters by whom?
By the former, I guess it would be Planning and Development Committee.
Pardon me?
The former Planning and Growth Committee meeting. Prior to going to Planning and Housing, we went to the Planning and Growth Management Committee, and we were told there by the city staff, city solicitor, and council that these are planning matters solely.
I understand, but I'm asking if you've made any overtures to any community members to support, or any councillors or anyone for favorite projects for this sign. Thank you.
Great. Questions of staff? Oh, thank you. Sorry. Never mind. I do have another person making a deputation. Chang Kien.
He is our optical engineer, and
Okay.
unfortunately he had to step out.
So anybody else to speak on the item? Seeing none. Questions of staff? No questions of staff?
I just have a question of staff. The deputant has suggested that the sign variance committee has made their opinion known that they don't believe this application should be heard at the sign variance committee. And I'm just wondering if that is the case or how that was made. Was that in writing? Have they instructed these sign companies to come here? What's the cutoff between the sign variance committee and this committee?
Through the chair, I'm not aware of what the sign variance committee has said in this regard. However, when an applicant is proposing a bylaw amendment like this, when they're asking to alter the term of the sign, like how long it can stay in place, alter it from 5 years to 10 years, that's what requires it to go to council for an amendment. If they had left the term the same at 5 years, they could go through the sign variance committee.
I see. Thank you.
Councillor Bradford?
Do we, this is new to me, do we have rules or regulations around the time in which electronic signs can run? So they mentioned that there would be a dimming overnight versus turning a sign off. Is that, do we turn signs off or do we just dim them, or?
Through the chair, there is a regulation in the bylaw that would govern the time of day that a sign could operate. It would have to shut off at 11 p.m. at night and turn back on again at 7 a.m. For this application, they have asked to run the sign 24 hours, which is actually consistent with the other signs in the area. But under normal circumstances, there are those hours of operations. There's also brightness restrictions that will be placed on a sign after sunset and before sunrise. The lighting levels would have to be reduced.
So the existing signs that have this, those are variances to that bylaw? Because we have a bylaw that would say these would shut off at 11?
Where they may be existing signs that predate the current bylaw, that regulation wouldn't apply to.
But for new signs that would go in under the current new bylaw, that's not how we would do it. It's grandfathered.
The existing signs are grandfathered. New signs would have to comply with the 11 p.m. shut off, 7 a.m. turn on. There are precious few exceptions to that in Dundas Square, for example, but that would be the only.
It's like a contextual thing. Okay, thanks.
Sorry. So I'm just going to try to summarize, maybe for the benefit of the committee, if you could summarize the variances. So it's location, size, hours of being operational. Are those the three big variances?
So, yeah, that's correct. Location being
Outside of the permitted area?
too close to the Gardner Expressway, the size, the height, the hours of operation, and in this application, the term of the sign permit. Oh, and I'm sorry, proximity to other signs as well. It's within the required separation distance to both nearby static signs and electronic signs.
Okay, thank you. Okay, speakers? Councillor Perks wanted to speak on it? Okay, we'll stand this down and then we'll move to the other. I think you're the deputant on the other item as well? Okay, so why don't we do that? 6.8, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 1589, the Queensway. Go ahead.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Again, much like the last, this application is seeking approval to permit a single-sided third-party electronic ground sign on the property. Now, in accordance again with the city sign bylaw. In accordance again with the city sign bylaw, this sign will contain only static images, meaning there will be no motion, no flashing or animation, maintain the minimum required transition time, and instantaneously transition ad copy. Again, much like the last, the amendments being requested are with respect to the proposed sign's separation distances, size and height, hours of illumination, and permit duration. The solar property is shown here, again located in Ward 3, Etobicoke, located on the south side of the south side of the Queensway and the north side of the Gardner Expressway, approximately 200 meters east of the East Mall. This slide shows an aerial photo of the property with, again, the property boundaries outlined in red. Now, on the solar property can be found a variety of business and economic related activities, which include a restaurant and car dealership on the Queensway frontage, while there's a brewery and a warehouse and distribution facility along the southerly edge close to the Gardner Expressway. The public location for the sign is shown here at the southeast corner, which should be intended to be facing traffic traveling westbound and leaving the city. This again is a sign that we're proposing to be located on the property, where again we look to install solar panel methods of powering the sign. On the reverse of the sign will be no ad copy, and we've also made agreements with Bullfrog Power to supply renewable energy sources to this sign. This image shows the traffic traveling westbound along the Gardner Expressway, again leaving the city, either onto the 403 or the 427 northbound. And this slide here again is taken from the city's sign view mapping tool, which outlines the sign districts which stem from the city's official plan for the area. And as you know, by here again to the north, east, south, and west, these are all employment areas that are intended to support the business activity within the area. Now, you will note that there is 2 large orange shaded areas to the north and to the east. To the north is I believe it's a Lowe's and a Canadian Tire, while to the east is IKEA. There simply are no sensitive land uses nearby. These are strictly employment and commercial businesses. We, as such, our belief is that there will be no negative impacts as a result of the proposed sign on these surrounding properties, and that it would be compatible with the area. Just to summarize, as well as build on what I've said previously. So there is a special sign district within the City of Toronto, which stems from about the Dufferin Bridge along the Gardiner Expressway to near the Strawn Road as well. And in that area, signs are permitted to be located within the Gardiner Expressway at any setback. They are also afforded special provisions that allow them to be larger in size than anywhere else in the city. The lights are not required to be turned off at any period. And for, Councillor Perks, who is a former councillor in that ward, or the former ward, he can attest to the fact that there is no consistency that the signs are located in the area. They are all various sizes, heights, and so on and so forth. There is no consistency. But when we look at what is currently existing within this area where we're proposing the sign, there is an established set of standards, and that is what's behind you there. These 5 signs are all in existence, have been issued since 2009 onwards, with the most recent approval being in 2017. These are not necessarily new approvals. These signs have been here in existence for quite a while, many of which are issued in perpetuity. Where we are seeking a 10-year permit, that's because we know that there's going to be no changes to the area. The location of the property has been an employment designated district since, well before I was born and probably well after I'm dead. So in consideration of that, we are of the opinion that the sign is permitted and would be a contributing factor to this area. And further, we have met with we have consulted with Councillor Grimes on this matter through our communications, and he's noted for both these applications that he is in support. He feels that these would contribute to his ward in positive ways, and he's recommended that the committee vote to approve the requested variances that we're seeking to permit these signs here. Thank you.
Finish questions of the deputy. Councillor Perks.
So you made reference to the Gardiner Gateway. Is your sign proposed within the Gardiner Gateway District?
It is not.
Oh, so the rules in the Gardiner Gateway District don't apply to your sign?
That is correct.
Okay. You made reference to part of your argument being that there should be consistency. The signs there that are larger than what the sign bylaw permitted, did they come to council as the result of staff saying this is a good sign proposal, or were they ones that were done by council overturning the advice from staff?
Speaking potentially at a turn, I believe most of the signs in this area were positive recommendations with a couple of exceptions, most recently being too strong, I believe, as I'm sure you guys have seen throughout the years.
So as you pointed out, I was the councillor for part of this area before, and I can tell you my memory is very different from yours. I can't remember any of the signs that are outside what the current sign bylaw says coming with a positive staff recommendation, but we'll just leave that there. Why is this not going to the sign variance committee?
Again, based on the comments we've received from the sign variance committee, we've been instructed by them on record to proceed through similar methods that we are today.
So I would love it. Can you provide me with any document from the sign variance committee instructing you to make your application here?
We can purchase the sign variance committee audio and video file, but the second part of that is that we are seeking a 10-year permit.
No, I asked you a specific question. You said that the sign variance committee instructed you to come here. Can you provide any documentation of an instruction from the sign variance committee that you come here?
Offhand, no, but we can provide that to you at a later date. But again, I'm mentioning to you, Councillor, that we are seeking a 10-year permit term, which we cannot seek through the traditional sign variance method.
So rather than arguing for consistency, which would be applying the bylaw equally to all people, you're saying that you should get special permission just on this one site to have something that no applicant could take to the sign variance committee at all. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what the question is. It's,
Well, then I'll ask it again. So you argued previously that there should be consistency. So rather than making an application through the sign variance process, which would have kept it consistent, you have brought here a proposal that we waive the consistent rule for a 5-year limit and instead give you a site-specific change that is inconsistent with everything else that we would approve through the sign variance process. Is that correct?
when we were reviewing this application prior to submitting it, we are looking what the context of the area currently is. And in that regard, a number of the signs, the 5 that are existing, I believe 4 of the 5 are issued in perpetuity. So in respect of that, we believe that the 10-year permit term is consistent with what the area is, and that's why we've come through this method seeking approval for our sign.
Okay, those are my questions.
Okay, I do have a question. So why do you need a variance for 10 years instead of 5 years? Why can't we just get a sign license like everybody else for 5 years? That's our bylaw.
Based on our performa for the site, on the investment we want to make, we are looking at about a 4.5, 5-year payback. And the purpose of the 5-year permit is to allow the city no longer to issue signs in perpetuity as it did prior to 2010. And so going forward, the intent of the bylaw is to review each location and review and consider if the sign is still consistent with the area it's been permitted for. And in this regard, when we look at the area as an employment hub for the city, where signs like this are permitted to be located as of right, we are confident, based on our conversations with staff and the planning department, that there will be no large-scale changes that would redesignate these properties to make them inconsistent with the area, such as sensitive land uses like parks or other residential. That just simply isn't the case here. So that's why we're asking to the extended permit term, rather than coming back every 5 years to bug the committee or bug you guys seeking approval.
Okay. Questions of staff? I do have a question of staff. Those signs that were there in perpetuity, were they a transfer from a legacy sign? That's why they're in perpetuity, or why are they?
The signs that were there previously, they were approved under the previous former Etobicoke sign bylaw, when community council would be the arbiter of these applications.
So it's not since the bylaw came into place?
That's right.
Have we approved any signs since the bylaw been into place?
We've recommended none of them. We didn't recommend the ones prior, for the record. We have not recommended any in this area. One has been approved.
For how
but
long?
It hasn't been built.
For how long? 5-year term?
I mean, the current bylaw has been in place for,
No, but was it for a 5-year term, 5-year license term that it
that was
approved?
for a 5-year license.
There's nothing in there, so it can work. Financially, 5 years can work.
We have heard in the past, there have been applications that have gone to the sign variance committee for similar signs for a 5-year term that get constructed.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to ask, so you're asking, your recommendation is not to approve this sign based on?
Through the chair, based on the proximity of the sign to the Gardner Expressway, the fact that it is not in the Gardner Gateway Special Sign District, the size of the sign, the height of the sign clutter in the general area, it doesn't meet the separation distance to other electronic signs. So there's a number of those things.
Too big, and not in the special zone?
Yes.
And too long?
Yes,
Too long of a period?
that's correct.
Councillor Bradford?
Do applicants through this process typically consult with you and your team on their application in the way that, like, planning, you would do a pre-application meeting with staff to get their perspective on things?
There is a back and forth through the chair. There is a back and forth. These applications come in at the end, they came in on December 31st. So there was a back and forth where we would express our concerns or our reservations on any application, perhaps, ask for maybe second thoughts on certain aspects, or even bringing the application in the first place.
So I guess to clarify, like, you could say, this is too big, this is too close, this is running overnight, we don't permit overnight, you seem to be applying for 10 years, we typically do this in 5 years. There's an opportunity for that feedback, and then an applicant can choose to acknowledge that feedback or disregard that.
That's correct.
Okay. Specifically, did you speak with the applicants about these projects?
I did not personally, but a number of other staff did. There were a lot of communications.
Okay, so they would have known in advance your position on this?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Speakers on item 6.7. Councillor Perks.
So I'm going to be moving the staff recommendation to refuse. You know, a long, long time ago, before I got engaged in community activism and local politics, I worked in daycare. And the worst part of daycare was nap time. The kids would do anything to avoid the nap. They'd go to the other daycare worker and say, Gordy wants us to have a nap now. We don't want to have a nap now. They'd throw temper tantrums. They say they needed to brush their teeth. They'd do anything they could to avoid nap time. We have struggled with getting a coherent set of policies around signs so that we could stop doing, as the deputant talked about, stop doing inconsistent, unfair stuff. We have passed sign bylaws and been taken to court. We put a billboard tax up. We were taken to court. There's a lawyer in the room one time who, when I was chair of Toronto East York Community Council and we turned a sign down, took us to court. They go to the sign variance committee, and if that's not working, they go here. They go to the local councillor. They do anything they can to avoid nap time. Nap time is actually having a reasonable, comfortable relationship between private advertising in public spaces and the people who use public spaces. Guys, it's nap time.
Okay. All those in favor? For the staff recommendations. That carries. Item 6.8.
I'll move to refusal.
Okay, all those in
I don't need to give the
favor?
speech again.
And that carries. The staff recommendations. 6.9, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 4.494 Richmond Street East. That's why you're there.
We are requesting that this item be withdrawn from consideration.
Sorry?
We are requesting that this item be withdrawn from consideration.
Okay, I can move that. I'll move withdraw. All those in favor? That carries. Okay, record that 6.9, Councillor Fletcher is opposed. 6.10, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 2075 Lawrence Avenue East. And I do have a motion that the local councillor has asked actually on 10 and 11, and I am moving that on behalf of the local councillor to refer this back to staff because further dialogue needs to happen on these two signs. So they've asked me to, the local councillor has asked me to put forward this motion, and I would like to have your support for it. Oh, do you need to speak? No. So vote on 6.10, area-specific amendment of the sign bylaw 2075 Lawrence Avenue East. Vote on the referral. All those in favor? That carries. And now item 6.11, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 2378-2410 Eglinton Avenue East. Referral back to staff again. All those in favor? And that carries. And 6.12. Is that you again? You go. Area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 2904 Shepherd Avenue East. Okay. Are you getting a break? Okay. Patrick Carrington?
Never personal.
Okay, Patrick, 5 minutes.
Thank you, and good afternoon to the members of the committee. I'm speaking on 2904 Shepherd Avenue, as I believe the staff report has left out a bit of the context that I think is important for this particular application. The sign in question is a roof sign. It's erected at the corner of Victoria Park and Shepherd. It has been at the corner of Victoria Park and Shepherd for over 15 years. Back in 2003, when the owner of the building originally applied to erect a roof sign on the building, at that time there was actually an official plan policy in Scarborough that prevented what they called non-accessory roof signs from being approved in that particular section of Scarborough. I believe it was the Lamoureux secondary plan. So at the time when the landlord came forward, he was told that he had to get a secondary plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, and then come forward for a sign bylaw amendment. So the application was provided to the city. It went before Scarborough Community Council. It was assessed and it was recommended for approval. That recommendation then went to City Council and it was adopted by City Council. The application was then followed up by an application to amend the sign bylaw with the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment in place. The staff recommendation at that time was for approval of the sign bylaw amendment. And so at the time, a roof sign with static third-party display was approved at this particular location. That was in 2003, and the sign was erected shortly thereafter in 2004. Now, at the time the original applications went forward, there was a residential building located approximately 110 meters to the north of this particular location, and the sign was being erected within 30 meters of the intersection, all of which was noted in the staff reports that went forward to City Council at the time. And notwithstanding that, it was the determination of City Council that on a planning basis under the Planning Act, that those amendments should be granted, and then the sign bylaw amendment should also be approved. What then happened about 5 years later was that there was a conversation between Pattison, or representatives of Pattison, and representatives of the city's bylaw unit. And there was, in that discussion, a question asked of whether or not, at the time, the Scarborough sign bylaw regulated display such that the static face could be converted to electronic display. There really wasn't a clear answer on that, and I reviewed the Scarborough bylaw myself before attending, and even I can't figure out whether or not the Scarborough sign bylaw once upon a time regulated the type of display between static and third-party illuminated or third-party LED display. So in 2009, the display was altered, and an electronic display was erected at the site. And it has been on continuous display at the site ever since then. So we're talking about 10 years of having this sign in the same position with an electronic static display. The city bylaw enforcement has taken issue with the sign and has said to our client, or my client, that there needs to be recognition under the existing bylaw that this sign is permitted or it has to come down. This was part and parcel of a number of different prosecutions that my office was working with the sign bylaw unit to resolve on behalf of Pattison, primarily dealing with roof signs throughout the city. On this particular application, it was Pattison's desire to file the necessary application with the city for a site-specific sign bylaw amendment to legalize what exists there today. So while the staff report approaches this afresh, looking at what it would, the assessment they would give for a sign that was being added there for the first time, I would ask you to look at this from the context of a sign that has been on display at this location for 15 years, with an LED display for the last 10 years, with City Council approval from a planning perspective for these particular amendments. And that really what we're asking for is the approval of the conversion from static display to electronic static display. It is a third-party sign erected on the roof, so it does require a site-specific bylaw amendment, which is why we're here and not at the Sign Variance Committee. But in all other respects, Pattison has indicated that they are prepared to live with the requirements of the sign bylaw, so there is no request for an extension of the sunset clause or a longer permit. There is also a proposal to re-angle the sign so it is less impactful potentially on the nearby residential, as well as to add individual louvers on the LED diodes that again would reduce the amount of potential glare on the residents. And my understanding from the public record, there have been no complaints or comments offered by anyone living close by to the particular location.
Thank you. And Councillor Perks has questions.
Okay, so first, in your comments, you said that you wanted to offer background that the staff report missed. Did you read the background section of the report on page 3, which lays out the history of how the sign was approved and that it was static copy and so on?
Yes, I think what's missing from the staff report is the discussion of the Planning Act applications that predated the amendment to the sign bylaw
Missed the
itself.
sentence where it says, in April 2003, the applicant obtained a variance from the former City of Scarborough sign bylaw?
Yes, I'm talking about the Planning Act applications that
I see.
preceded that.
Okay. Now, in your comments, I listened carefully. I didn't hear you mention that, I heard you say that the sign's been sitting there for 10 years and there have been no complaints. Did I hear you right?
That is my understanding of the record.
Right. So by no complaints, you're not including the fact that the charges have been laid by the city against this sign?
Certainly, the charge has been laid for erecting a sign without the requisite permit. There's been discussion as to whether or not the permit would have allowed for this type of changeover, but what I'm speaking to is any complaints or comments as part of this application from residents.
Those are my questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? Questions with staff? No questions with staff? Okay.
I'll move the staff recommendation to refuse. The city for some time has been trying to get the owner of this sign to get into compliance with their original approval. They haven't. We don't allow this kind of sign here. It's not a proposal we should even consider seriously.
Do you have, sorry.
I was going to say, I don't think you did, but now you did.
Okay. I'm going to indulge the committee because I do just want to ask staff a couple of questions. So this sign has been repeatedly denied by city staff, is that?
The sign was, prior to the current bylaw and even the current official plan and zoning bylaw, this sign was approved under the former Scarborough official plan, zoning bylaw, and sign bylaw for a static roof sign. The new sign bylaw came into effect about 10 years ago. This sign was converted just prior to that. We received complaints. We laid charges. It has been to court. The court agreed with the city that it had been modified without a permit. So they gave, the court order, though, did give them the option to make this application, which is why they're here today. And this is the first instance where this sign has been before this committee.
So if the applicant wanted, could he put a static sign in there? Is that where you're saying that they have permission? They have
did.
permission for a static sign in there?
Since the sign, and I may pass this over to legal if I get it wrong, since they had the sign and modified it prior to the current bylaw coming into force, they've lost all lawful non-conforming rights to the sign. So if this application is not granted, there is no fallback position for them.
Okay.
Quick question to clarify. Would the applicant have known when they made those modifications that that's changing what they had, and then, like, that's typically how grandfathering works, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Right. I can't put myself in their shoe. I would assume that they would have, but that would just be an assumption. They're a sophisticated sign operator, and they're aware that modifying signs to such an extent would more than likely, if not certainly, trigger the need for a new permit.
be the same thing, like, you have a legal non-conforming use, you change that, you
That's
don't
right.
get to go back to that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Vote on the staff report, on the motion from Councillor Perks on staff report. All those in favor, and that carries. Motion to adjourn? We are adjourned. We don't need a motion. We just adjourn.